Nairobi has always been East Africa's safe haven, the city where those fleeing the high-pressure politics of Kampala come to catch their breath. But on November 16th, 2024, that sanctuary became a trap, an abduction zone. Dr. Kizza Besigye, a man who's been described as possibly the most arrested man in Africa, checked into his hotel in Nairobi on a Saturday morning. He was there for a book launch, but his schedule included a private meeting at an apartment on Riverside Drive. By 4:30 p.m., the man who had survived decades of state violence in Uganda disappeared in the heart of Kenya's capital. But this was not just any disappearance. It was a planned abduction. So the question remains, who took him and why did they take him? Welcome to the African Ledger. If you value careful, fact-based storytelling about power, politics, and accountability across Africa, support our work by liking and subscribing. Here, we tell documented stories from across the continent, grounded in evidence and centered on the people affected. To understand why the state is so obsessed with one man, you have to go back to 1980. Dr. Kizza Besigye wasn't always an outsider. He was once Museveni's ally and personal physician. After graduating with a degree in human medicine from Makerere University in 1980, he joined the National Resistance Army, NRA rebellion, which overthrew President Milton Obote's dictatorial rule in 1986. Besigye held a number of different senior positions in Museveni's new administration, including Minister of State for Internal Affairs and the President's Office. Then in 1993, he was appointed the Army's Chief of Logistics and Engineering, and later, Senior Military Advisor to Defense Minister. He was now part of the National Resistance Movement's inner circle, which by then had established itself as the civilian government. Besigye remained close to Museveni until 1999, when he left the ruling party. He claimed that the movement had strayed from its original founding principles, which included eliminating corruption, ensuring security for all, and promoting democracy through open elections. He believed that Uganda needed to be freed once more, but this time from a government that he had helped establish. This would eventually come to define his life's work. In the subsequent presidential elections, he was the frontrunner against Museveni under the pressure group Reform Agenda, and later the political party Forum for Democratic Change. For this, Besigye has been imprisoned, placed under house arrest, forced into exile, renditioned, and repeatedly subjected to state violence. After the presidential elections in 2001, Besigye was forced to escape to South Africa, something that would mark one of the most painful chapters in this journey. In November 2004, while Besigye was in exile, his younger brother, Joseph Musasizi Kifefe, known to many as Sasi, was arrested on treason allegations. Despite Sasi having lived as a private citizen, security operatives arrested him and he was accused of raising funds for the People's Redemption Army, PRA, an alleged rebel group that the authorities frequently connected to Besigye. The charges went further. He was accused of participating in the murder of a man named John Byarugaba, a figure who, it later on emerged, did not exist. For 3 years, Sasi was moved between prisons, where his health began to fail under what his family described as a regime of torture and neglect. By 2007, his kidneys were failing. Although a judge eventually granted him bail on medical grounds, bureaucratic delays and refusals from state agencies to return his passport made it impossible for him to seek specialized treatment he needed abroad. On November 29, 2007, just as Besigye had returned from exile to find his brother wasting away, Sasi died in the intensive care unit at Mulago Hospital. He was never convicted of a single crime, and his life and death became a permanent symbol of the extraordinary risks faced not just by political leaders in Uganda, but by their families. Recently, Besigye has been less active in politics and did not contest the 2021 election. However, in early 2024, he broke away from the Forum for Democratic Change, FDC, which he had founded 20 years earlier, to form the People's Front for Freedom, PFF. The abduction in Nairobi was not an isolated incident. It was the escalation of a pattern that had been tested months earlier. On July 23, 2024, 36 members of the Forum for Democratic Change Party were arrested by Kenyan security forces after they had traveled to Kisumu, Kenya. They were then forcibly deported to Uganda, where upon their return, the state charged them with terrorism-related offenses, accusing them of traveling to Kenya, allegedly to provide or receive terrorist training. After breaking into their hotel rooms, the security agents had taken their phones, laptops, and other devices and returned them to Uganda. The Forum for Democratic Change Party and their lawyers insisted that they had entered Kenya legally, particularly for a training program. The 32 men were sent to Kitalia prisons, while the 4 female suspects were remanded to Luzira Maximum Prison. Among the 36 was Simon Rutarondwa, a political refugee who had lived in Kenya for over 10 years. This legal battle saw a turning point on October 31, 2024, when the group was finally granted bail. By the end of the year, the court formally dismissed the case for lack of evidence. Still, the operation had served its purpose. It proved that our borders were no longer a barrier. The operation to seize Dr. Besigye was a meticulous trap, allegedly planned for months with the help of those within his own circles. On the morning of November 16, 2024, Besigye landed in Nairobi to attend a book launch for Kenyan politician Martha Karua. He took a taxi to his hotel in Hurlingham, accompanied by his long-term ally, Haj Obeid Lutale. A few hours later, the 2 men left the hotel and headed to Riverside Drive, just 3 miles away from their hotel, for what they believed was a private meeting. According to his wife, Winnie Byanyima, the head of the UN's organization to tackle HIV and AIDS, they were there to meet a Ugandan national and a British national who claimed they had businessmen interested in financially backing Besigye's new party, the People's Front for Freedom, PFF. The room was set up. Inside, there was a box that appeared to be a stash of money, and one of the hosts was carrying 2 guns. Shortly after they arrived, 8 men in plain clothes knocked on the door, identifying themselves as Kenyan police officers, and told Besigye and Lutale they were under arrest. Besigye tried to explain he had nothing to do with the items in the room, but the agents refused to listen. Under the cover of the night, 4 of the men bundled Besigye and Lutale into a car with Kenyan number plates and began the long drive toward the border of Uganda. As they drove, the mask slipped. The 4 men switched from speaking Swahili and started talking in Ugandan languages, Luganda and Runyankole. Besigye and Lutale were then ferried across the Malaba border into Uganda without their passports or belongings, which were later picked up by Besigye's party officials from the Nairobi hotel. According to PFF spokesperson Ibrahim Semujunganda, who spoke to Uganda's Monitor newspaper, Besigye and Lutale went through the Malaba border post without stopping for routine security checks. They only changed vehicles. The 4-wheel drive vehicle with the Kenyan number plate was left at the Malaba border post, and they moved to another vehicle with a Ugandan number plate. Back in Nairobi, the silence was deafening. Besigye's taxi driver waited outside the Riverside apartment for more than 12 hours before finally giving up when he couldn't reach him. In Uganda, his team began sending out distress calls as his phones went unanswered. His disappearance hit the headlines and raised eyebrows in the region, with his wife taking to social media to report that her husband had been kidnapped in Nairobi. The next day, his reserved seat at the book launch, where he was expected to be the guest speaker, remained empty, with organizers raising alarm over his absence. For 4 long days, Besigye was a ghost, held with no access to his family or legal team. He finally reemerged on November 20th at a military court in Kampala. Standing before a military judge, he was charged as a civilian with crimes allegedly committed in foreign cities as far away as Geneva and Athens. Besigye's response was a firm defense of his dignity and the law. "I am a civilian," he told the court, arguing that if there were any charges against him, he belonged in a civilian court. His lawyer stood with him, citing a 2006 Constitutional Court ruling that military courts have no power to try civilians, but the state forced the hearing to continue. The abduction of Kizza Besigye sent shockwaves through the region. The Kenyan government found itself in a difficult position, swinging between denying any knowledge of the operation and remaining silent. But across the border in Uganda, the narrative was far more candid. Ugandan Information Minister Chris Baryomunsi admitted that the two governments had been in constant contact, sharing the intelligence needed to track Besigye down. Speaking to Uganda's NBS TV, he said, and I quote, "The government of Uganda was in touch with the government of Kenya. Otherwise, how would you arrest somebody in the middle of Nairobi and then bring them back to Uganda, whether through the airport or land, without full knowledge and support of the state there in Kenya?" This admission left many Kenyans questioning the true nature of security ties between the two neighboring countries, and if there was a full disclosure that Besigye would be charged in a military court. Kenya's acting Foreign Affairs Minister, Musalia Mudavadi, refrained from giving clear answers to journalists, pleading that his country should not be judged too harshly. While he described Kenya as an open country that allowed for a lot of latitude, he issued a cryptic warning to foreigners against causing rifts between Kenya and their home countries. Mudavadi insisted that Besigye's matter will be resolved diplomatically, describing Uganda as Kenya's strong partner. At the same time, human rights groups like Amnesty International pointed to a disturbing trend, noting that Besigye's case followed a string of high-profile disappearances in Kenya, including the forced deportation of 4 Turkish refugees to Ankara, where they faced allegations of conspiring against President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The legal battle for Dr. Kizza Besigye has slowly transformed into a war of patience, persistence, and endurance, as the state strategy appears centered on keeping him locked away until either the public's attention fades or his own health gives way. As of today, Dr. Kizza Besigye has been behind bars for more than 465 days. During this time, he has been denied bail at least 4 times, with the courts consistently ruling that it is too early to release him since he has not entered a formal plea. But as the legal clock stalls, it is Besigye's physical well-being that is paying the highest price. By January 22, 2026, his wife Winnie Byanyima reported that the 69-year-old leader was extremely weak and suffering from significant localized pain in his legs that made it difficult to walk. The conditions of his confinement are stark, and while the prison service has attempted to downplay his condition, his family and legal team tell a different story. One of a man that looks frail and is falling ill with increasing frequency. Lab results have confirmed that his infections are increasing, yet the court recently rejected a request to transfer him to a medical facility of his choice, claiming his health can be managed within the prison walls. Recently, on 23rd February 2026, when his family organized a mass at Rubaga Cathedral to pray for his health and release, President Museveni himself allegedly called the Archbishop, Paul Semogerere, to block the service. The president labeled the prayer political, forcing the cancellation of the mass, even as worshippers had already allegedly begun to gather. In the wake of the January 2026 elections, which were conducted under a total internet blackout, the rhetoric from the government has turned even more chilling. Army Chief Muhoozi Kainerugaba has been reported making public threats, calling Besigye a dead man walking. For those who have followed Besigye's 25-year journey of defiance, this is no longer a legal proceeding. It is a fight for the very life of a man who has dedicated himself to the health of others, now being denied that same dignity himself. The story of Dr. Kizza Besigye is a dark window into a new reality for East Africa. For decades, the borders between our countries were more than just lines on a map. They were promised as a shield for those seeking safety from political persecution at home. But today, that shield is being dismantled. What happened to Besigye in Nairobi is not a solo incident. It is part of a growing pattern of transnational repression across East Africa. Just months ago, in May 2025, we saw this same pattern when Kenyan activist Boniface Mwangi and Ugandan lawyer and human activist Agatha Atuhaire were snatched from their hotel in Dar es Salaam. They were held for 4 days, blindfolded, and subjected to brutal torture, including acts of sexual violence, before being dumped across their respective borders. The reach of this repression is wide and coordinated. In January 2025, Tanzanian media activist Maria Sarungi was violently abducted by armed men in Nairobi, though public outcry led to her release hours later. More recently, in February 2026, Tanzanian human rights defender Mshabaha Hamza was rescued from a violent abduction attempt in Nairobi, described as a premeditated, forceful rendition to Tanzania. These are no longer random events. They are evidence of a pattern where Tanzanian, Ugandan, and Kenyan critics are targeted regardless of where they seek refuge. As Dr. Besigye sits in a cell after almost 2 years, his story forces us to confront something deeper about power, protection, and what citizenship actually means in this region. If a state can cross a border and take someone from a hotel room, then this is about more than politics. It is about the systems meant to protect all of us. And so the question remains, what protections are in place to protect East African nationals who challenge their governments? In whose hands are we safe? This episode is dedicated to Dr. Kizza Besigye, to his late brother Joseph Musasizi Kifefe, and to all Ugandans who have paid a price for speaking out. We will continue to follow verified developments related to this case and report them as they emerge. Thank you for watching. This is the African Ledger, and if you value careful, evidence-based reporting from across the continent, consider subscribing to our channel. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of one another. Ciao.